This is Inspirational Women, a weekly series shining the spotlight on female trailblazers making a true difference in our community. Once again, here is Kate Daniels.
We're meeting Maria van Lieshout, an artist of print and word. Maria has illustrated numerous children's books and now is the author of an important historical fiction graphic novel, Song of a Blackbird. It's a great vehicle for reaching a young adult audience, but all ages will learn much about a challenging time in Amsterdam during World War II. Maria van Lieshout, good morning, and thank you so greatly for being with us this morning.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Kate. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
As am I, and I first have to say how grateful I am that this book has come out, Song of a Blackbird. There's just so much that is so critically important about it. Certainly art is at the core of it. That's so essential here. The message of the Blackbird is so great in this. And, you know, I think we can't overlook the fact that this year, 2025, is the 80th anniversary of so much that went on for the ending of World War II and how this book plays into that.
Absolutely, yes. It's the 80th anniversary of liberation. And yes, so I'm from the Netherlands. I grew up in the Netherlands, and that's where the book takes place, in Amsterdam, and which is where my family is from. My mother was born in Amsterdam, so were my grandparents. So we go many generations back, and the book is very much a tribute to some very brave people in the city of Amsterdam who resisted the Nazi regime and used their art and creativity to save tens of thousands of lives. It's really an amazing story. And when I discovered the story, I was just so incredibly inspired and motivated to do something with it. And it took me a long time. It's been 12 years in the making. And it took me quite some time to figure out exactly how to tell the story. But now in hindsight, I do believe that this format, the graphic novel, with the sort of historic photographs weaved into the art, ended up being a really good storytelling vehicle to get across what I attempted to get across.
Well, I certainly have a feeling about that, but I'm interested to know why you decided then that this would be the best vehicle for presenting the story.
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. So to back up a little bit, when I grew up, there was never much talk about the war in our house and in our family, because my grandparents did not want to talk about the war. It had been a very traumatic time in their life, as it is for many people who've lived through a war. And they were very eager to put that behind them. So anytime we asked them questions about that period, they changed the subject and they just told us, you know what, that was a really traumatic time. You know, that's fortunately behind us. We want to look forward. Let's not talk about this. So when my grandmother passed away in 2011, we thought that with her, all those World War II stories were also gone, until while cleaning up her apartment, we found several documents that talked about the life under the Nazi occupation. And those documents had been written by my grandparents in the 1980s. I believe, looking back, that they felt, even though they didn't want to talk about it, it was really important for them to record these things. And I'm so grateful to them that they decided to do this. So when we found these documents, it was like finding a treasure. One document completely documented the bombing of my mother's childhood home, which had been a very traumatic event in her life and in my grandparents' life. And it documented in great detail what it was like, why it happened, what it smelled like, what it looked like, what it felt like. So that was incredibly rich. And then the second document was written by my grandfather about his experience with the resistance in Amsterdam, and especially the things he experienced with his very best friend, Fritz. And Fritz was very hardcore resistance, was living in hiding from the SS, and eventually was caught actually and executed by the SS for his resistance work. But my grandfather talked in great details about the things the two men experienced, how they stayed out of the hands of the Nazis until they didn't. And the third thing we found was a book, a biography about a man by the name of Walraven van Hal, also known as Wally. And Wally had been sort of the Dutch resistance banker. He was a banker by trade, and he did everything to fund resistance activities. And when sort of, all those funds dried up, he masterminded a huge bank heist because the Dutch National Bank had been taken over by the Nazis. And he devised a way to steal 50 million guilders, which was a huge amount of money, even now, but certainly at that time, from the Nazis to fund the resistance. And my grandfather's friend Fritz was part of this organization that pulled this off. So I was so incredibly inspired about this sort of Robin Hood story, and I dove in and started researching and reaching out to people and spending time in the Amsterdam archives to find out more information about what really happened. And as I was researching and talking to people and uncovering information, I became incredibly inspired by the role that artists and women had played during this heist. And the bottom line is, if it weren't for the artists, this bank heist could not have happened, because the way they did it is they forged these treasury bills, which are almost like stocks. They're pieces of paper that are worth a lot of money. And they forged these documents, which was not only super heroic because they did it, at great risk, but it was also genius, because during the war, when everything was rationed, when no supplies were to be found, when electricity was rationed, so they had to do this in the dark at night, with the help of candlelight. Unbelievable. So once I became so inspired by the role of artist, I decided I wanted to really tell this story from the perspective of a young female artist. And I am an illustrator. I had illustrated, about 15 children's picture books before that. And as that realization dawned on me that I wanted to tell a story from the perspective of the artist, I was like, oh, that also frees me up to write it as a graphic novel, as opposed to, for instance, a regular novel, which would be a stretch for me because I'm not a novelist. But, being able to do this as a graphic novel and using art and images to tell the story was an incredible, challenge for me. And it was a fun challenge for me because that's my wheelhouse. That's what I do. So sorry, that was a very long answer to your question, but that's kind of how it all took place.
Well, it is the answer, and it's a beautiful answer. It really gives us just so much insight into the whole history of this. You've given us this really great encapsulated version without all the intricate details that we find in the pages of this book. It really does highlight, as you said, this is your craft. This is your talent to be a graphic artist. And so it does naturally feel natural. But it also, and I think that's probably something that was in your mind too, this is a story for all ages, but certainly we want to reach younger generations, and they certainly love the graphic novels these days.
Yeah, it's really my hope and my goal to reach a younger audience. And then I'm thinking teens, young adults, kids as young as 14. I don't think younger than 14 is appropriate unless a kid is really very advanced, because some of the subject matter is pretty tough. Mm-hmm. But certainly for teens, certainly for young adults, I believe it's very important to keep telling these stories. If it weren't for my grandparents who had written down their stories in the 1980s, I would never have found those documents. I probably would never have written this book. So I think it is incredibly important to pass stories on to next generations. And so as my grandparents believed it was their job to write it down, as hard as it was for them, I feel it is my job to pass along those stories to the next generation and to make sure that teens read it. Having said that, I have found, because the book actually came out in the Netherlands earlier in 2024, that there's certainly an older audience that also connects with the book. I think especially those who have, personal experiences with World War II, with the Holocaust, but even people who are interested in, the role of women in the resistance, or people who love art and the power that art has to be kind of a unifying force. I think there are, many reasons that people kind of gravitate to this book, and I love seeing that. I love seeing people responding to the book, obviously.
Oh, absolutely. And to your point of how it resonates with so many different audiences, those of us who are older and have maybe just then like a second generation experience connection with World War II. For instance, in my case, my mother actually came from Poland and had been in a German labor camp during the
Oh.
war before she finally, at liberation, emigrated to Canada. So just like with your grandparents, how there was really a resistance really to talk much about it. It took many years to finally begin to bring that. I guess there's just so much pain, I think, that you have to they needed to distance themselves before they could really say anything about it.
Yeah, I think it was their way of coping.
Mm.
It was a different generation. I think now we know more, and we know now that in order to deal with traumatic events, it is important to talk about them and to share them and to kind of work through the feelings. But I think back then times were different, and it was very much about, putting on a strong face and not going back to those difficult times. So as you probably know, Kate, that the war doesn't end when the war ends, because the trauma lives on, even in generations after. Certainly, both my parents were children of the war, and were traumatized as children. And that is something that I have seen up close, and it has affected me in turn. So that was another reason I really felt strong about writing this story. And it also was the reason I decided to include two storylines, one set in the past in 1943 and one set in the present, where we see the same two characters, the two young children, as older people, and we see how the war has affected them both. And that was important to me because I'm a witness of this. I'm a witness that the kind of the multi-generational trauma that war brings, and I'm sure that you have that same experience there.
Yes. And I wonder if you find, as I had found, in those earlier years, that certainly lessons had been learned. We would not go back to having such catastrophic occurrences in our world. But of course, it didn't take long before it just would pop up here, there, and now what we see just even so much more broadly.
Yes, and I think that is exactly why it is so important to keep telling the stories.
Mhm.
As much as I understand the impulse to not talk about it, there is clearly a very important reason to pass along the stories. And I think those reasons are twofold. Partly, it's a warning, right? Like, it's
Mhm.
happened before, and it can certainly happen again, and it can happen very fast. But secondly, also to be inspired. And I believe that is my main reason. I want the book to be inspiring, because the people that inspired my story are incredibly brave, smart, heroic people. I've thought a lot through studying resistance, what resistance is, and ultimately, I believe resistance is putting the well-being of another person ahead of your own, especially when it is difficult or inconvenient or even dangerous. And I believe, especially for young people, it is really important to understand how important it is to do that, and how important it is to resist. And last night I was having my book launch here, in Alameda, where I live, with our local bookstore. And there were a bunch of high schoolers there, and I told them, I said, listen, even like standing up for a kid that's bullied in school, that's also resistance, because it's also really hard and it's probably inconvenient, but it's important. And it's resistance because you're going against the system, you're going against the status quo of not saying anything, of kind of looking the other way. And I think it is really important to talk to the next generation about resisting. And resistance doesn't always mean, saving thousands of lives. It can also be really small things, to just really seriously look out for people in your community and making sure that they're okay. That's also resistance.
Yes. And in some of those cases, if we think of resisting when things are still kind of low key and that keeps them maybe at bay instead of saying, oh, it'll be fine, we'll get past it. And then it escalates until it became World War II. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what I've learned from studying Nazis is they are masters at using sort of a very kind of dominant masculine attitude. And the reason of that is to spread fear. They're so eager to spread fear in hopes that people will refrain from resisting, will refrain from pushing back. And that's their MO. And I think if we realize that, when it's first getting started, it's just really just talk, right? I think it's a cliche, it's such an important saying, the thing to fear, it's fear itself. If we become afraid to speak up for others, if we become afraid to say no, if we become afraid to set boundaries, then we're giving them all the power. So Timothy Snyder says, do not obey in advance. Do not give them power over you, especially not if they haven't asked yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we're strong and many of us know what's right and wrong, and if we kind of follow our hearts and follow our gut and continue to speak up for people who are perhaps targeted, then we will be okay. I truly believe that. But yes, we cannot look the other way. I mean, the majority of Dutch people did look away, and I think that's why the Nazi regime was allowed to take it that far. The people I wrote about are very heroic, but the majority of the Dutch people didn't do anything. They were just trying to get through the war. And I'm very hopeful that, like, in today's world where we have the internet and we have ways of organizing and connecting with each other, it'll be harder to look away, and it will be easier to find like-minded people to organize with and to commune with, and even just to share stories with. Because to kind of take this to a more hopeful place, I am a huge believer in the power of stories and the power of art to unite. In fact, this is the reason that the Nazis during the Second World War outlawed all sorts of art, right? Any art that wasn't Germanic, did not depict white people. Music like jazz or scat or swing was outlawed because the Nazis understood the incredible power that art has and that stories have to unite us. Stories enable us to see another perspective, to sort of look at the world through the eyes of another for a little bit. And in that way, it creates empathy. And the Nazis realized this, and that's why they outlawed it. So for us to continue to kind of enjoy stories and storytelling and read books, especially about people whose experiences may be different from ours, that is an excellent way to kind of fight hate and fight the division that's out there. Because we're consciously being divided, right? Even if it's just like the social media companies who are actively trying to make us like disagree about everything and make us outraged and fight with each other because there's money in it for them. If we click and share, then they make more money. So spreading division is incredibly profitable for social media companies. So the best thing we can do to counter that is actually meet with people and, read stories together and get together. And I think that is another way to resist. So I'm a real big advocate for that too.
You are, and you're obviously so passionate, comes across so clearly and strongly, which is what we need to be bold, to be firm in how we say it, that confidence to keep sharing that and being encouraging of each other. And I feel both with this book, Song of a Blackbird, and here with how you speak about it and experiences, you're really supporting and promoting this.
And realizing that there's not so much that we can perhaps achieve just by ourselves, but we're not by ourselves. We're together. There are so many of us. So as long as we, organize and get together and have each other's back, we'll be okay. But as I learned, researching this story, and I write about this in the back, heroic actions, heroic things are rarely committed by just a few people. One of the reasons I decided to fictionalize my story is so that I could focus on just a few people, because I felt that that would make the book a little bit more accessible for a younger audience if we could just follow a few characters through time. But the reality of it is that hundreds or thousands even were involved in this bank heist, were involved in these activities to rescue these Jewish children. And that is how heroic activities work. We have to work together, we have to organize, and we have to do it together. And once we do that, I believe the sky is the limit, and we can achieve very, very much.
And there's where a lot of the hope is. If we realize that we are part of something greater, that we are part of it, but we need to play our part for the whole picture to really come together. So,
absolutely,
right,
yes, yeah. And we cannot just sit at home behind our computers under our comforters, right? That's not how this works. We have to, and it's totally great to reach out over social media and get to know people and organize. That's fantastic. But I also really believe in the power of meeting people in person, and, whether it's at a bookstore or a sports club or the library or a school, talking to people face to face. I think there's tremendous power and promise and hope in that as well.
and in neighborhoods coming together to know who you're living next door to. I mean, that was so critical in those days during the war, where people did know more about who their neighbors were and saw changes taking place and knew who they needed to or could go to for support and such. So here today, we need to do that too, connect.
Yeah. And I find when I go out into the real world and I go do my grocery shopping and I take my dog to the park, I find people to be extremely nice, much nicer than I find them to be on social media, where people often are really upset and triggered, and probably the algorithm has gotten to them to that place. But I really enjoy meeting people in real life. I think it is a very pleasant thing. So, I highly recommend it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes. And, we're still in the middle of winter where, well, you can have gatherings in your home or, like at the library or community centers. But as things warm up a bit, then we can start having those block parties, for instance, or a barbecue in our
Yeah,
yard.
or even like even if you're in a colder area, like at school, right? I know, like, if I love seeing that there's now an initiative to have kids, put their phones away and just really be present, whether it's for, a class and a teacher, or whether it's just to connect with each other. And even I have a 15-year-old son, so I see up close the impact that phones and social media has on teens. And but like anytime he puts his phone away and has like real time with friends where the phone is not involved, every single time he tells me afterwards that he loved it, and he tells me, "Man, that was great. I really enjoyed that." So yeah, get away from those phones and just, meet people face to face and make art together, read books together, like talk, play sports, shoot hoops, whatever. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And well, the art, whatever that art is, and it's broad as to what it is, but pursue that, because there is just so much that is freeing, liberating, and that also is important messages to share with the world.
Yeah, and it's just connecting. Like, I don't know if you've ever like been in a bar where a band was playing and everyone was just sort of into the music, and you catch somebody's eye and you just realize you're both like on the same wavelength and you're both sort of having an experience. And that's perhaps the same experience you have when you're like looking at a piece of art or reading a book, that you're experiencing something that the creator, that the artist was willing to put out there. And I think that is very powerful, and that's why I'm such a believer in the power of art to unite us and to have us see things and learn about things and experience things that perhaps otherwise we would not. I've certainly become really inspired by the power of art to fight hate, and the power of art to unite, just through the research of this book, and that is what I try to take across and that's what I hope that people take away from the book. But yeah, it's something that I've become a really big believer in.
Well, the art here is really stunning. And there's a way that you juxtapose some that is photography. There are the pictures that you superimpose the graphic novel, the graphic art on top of. But it really, in picture and a few words, can speak volumes. And I think that's another great value of this graphic novel.
Yes, thank you. And, the graphic novel is historical fiction. Once I started doing research and I realized what a wealth of information the Amsterdam City Archives and the Lieshout, which is the archive that maintains and collects archival material from the Second World War. When I realized what a wealth of information we were sitting on, I was like, well, how cool would it be if I write a story that's historical fiction, if I actually combine actual historical photographs with my illustration, which in a way is also combining fiction and fact, right?
Yeah.
So that was one of the thought process that went on. Furthermore, during the Nazi regime, taking photos of street scenes was forbidden. It was punishable. So the photographers that took these pictures were actually in the resistance, and their photos are in and of themselves acts of resistance. And they were often also taken by women from like baby carriages. They would make like little holes in their baby carriage and take photos through the hole, or in their handbag, they would have a little hole and take the picture that way, or under their coats. And it's by a group called the Hidden Camera, and it's absolutely amazing what they were able to document, which of course helped me when I was doing my research in finding out exactly what happened and what those street scenes looked like. Because of course, if you're going to draw them, you're going to have to understand, what the people wore and what the streets looked like, what the houses looked like. So those photographs that I encountered became a tremendous treasure and wealth of information for me.
Well, it is truly a treasure. This is such an important story, again, in this 80th anniversary year, important to remember, to just become more connected to, and to find our role in today's world and how this plays into it, because I believe it certainly does. So, Song of a Blackbird, newly here in the U.S. and available at all of our favorite book sources, right, Maria?
Yes, absolutely. It's available anywhere books are sold. I'm a big fan of indie bookstores. So, if you are lucky enough to have an independent bookstore in your town or your city, go check it out. But it will also be available in libraries and hopefully school libraries. And I love it if people would, seek it out. Let me know what they think.
And to do that, your website and all the socials too, right?
Yes, yeah. A good place to follow me is Instagram, because I always am, it's such a visual place, and I love posting on Instagram about things that I learned or things that I've encountered. So that's a good place to follow and to comment. And when people comment, I'll always comment back. But I also have a website, actually, songofablackbird.com is a webpage that devoted to this particular book. And from there, you can link to my bio and my other books and way to contact me. So yeah, feel free to check it out.
Wonderful. Well, this is something that has been so great. What a gift to be able to converse with you this morning, Maria van Lieshout. I've just loved it. I wish you just unprecedented success with Song of a Blackbird, and look forward to further books from you.
Oh, thank you so much, Kate, for having me and for this wonderful discussion. I really enjoyed your questions.
Thank you for being here this morning to meet these wonderfully inspiring guests, devoted to their own growth and dedicated to making a difference. Please check the station's website for the podcasts. For more information about these guests, and please share the stories with your family and friends. I'm Kate Daniels. If you'd like to connect with me, simply send me an email to katedaniels@hubbardradio.com. Be kind as you go about this day and week.
Thank you for listening to Inspirational Women. Tune in every Sunday morning at this time to hear about those truly empowering the Northwest community, all for the greater good. Sunday Morning Magazine and Inspirational Women are a public service of Hubbard Radio Seattle.